Hello everybody and welcome to another Chameleons video. Today I will be talking about a project that I like to call Therapsidus, as it has no official name. This was originally a collaborative speculative evolution project within the Jurassic Junction, also known as the Dino Diego Discord server, similar to the Kaiju tournament event thing that my friend Stu Bonk covered in his video, but this one was a scenario in which the Permian extinction, or Great Dying, never occurred, and all of the entries were submitted by users in this server, and they could exist at any point from just after the extinction until today. So, let's get into it. Before we get into it, I just would like to clarify that the order I will be covering them is not the submission order, or any other. The order is specifically the order in this phylogenetic tree that Dirofs on the server made. So, let's actually get into it. Just before we quickly get into it, I'm going to give a disclaimer that any art that isn't credited is by me. Other than that, all of the art is going to be by the original artists, I believe. It's the greatest creature in the entire collaborative project, the Conpla, or Coronoderma regalia, which is a small euthycarcinoid, which is an incredibly obscure group of Paleozoic arthropods, and this one lives in beaches in the Jurassic. Next up is Macrocanthus titanus by Ath, which is a humongous acanthodian, also known as a spiny shark, which is potentially the largest creature to ever exist in this universe, and it is a filter feeder similar to whale sharks and basking sharks and baleen whales. Next up is Idacolassi davioni, created by Trike7117, which is a absolutely humongous eugenodont, which evolved to be so big due to an evolutionary arms race with cephalopods, and it can live in the very depths of the ocean, but it's not limited to there, travelling up and down. It also has a little kind of creature that lives on the side of it, like a remora, and that is actually a descendant of coelacanths known as Chapili wanensis, which is actually named after me. Next up is the fish, or Piscium rimamala, which is a Gyrophagus late surviving placoderm, which has evolved features much more like modern fish, fish that are alive today, and it lives in shallow waters. It is the fish of all time. I forgot to mention this, but the fish is created by a budgie. Next is the Alisala, or Durusalamandra crocodilus by Stu Bonk, and this is a Platyopsaurin archegosaurid, which was the subfamily of archegosaurids that contained the largest amphibians ever, and this creature is basically a big one of these that has convergently evolved to fill the niche of crocodilians. Next up is another archegosaurid, though this one's descended from Melasaurinae rather than Platyopsaurinae. And this one is the giraffe salamander / titan tadpole, which is the name of the juveniles, or Aquagiraffa verrucoceras, created by me. And it fills a niche similar to that of giraffes and sauropods, but it is also omnivorous and semi-aquatic. It lived in the late Jurassic and also has little horns on its head, which actually formed from its gills, which became hardened as it matured. Next up is the Azura pterolos, or Thanetosauroptera imperatormegas, by Gogoaku, and this is a descendant of crocodilomorphs that lives in basically the modern day, and it's convergently evolved to look like a tyrannosaur. It's also apparently intelligent and lives in groups. Now, this creature should definitely not be allowed in the event, since the first crocodilomorphs did not evolve until the late Triassic, and this is supposed to be creatures from the Permian. Next up is the Neurosuchians by the Dapaspinosaur, and these are a clade of aquatic archosauromorphs which evolved in the latest Permian, and these are filling a niche similar to that of the ichthyosaurs and the Thalattosaucians. And since they're all part of one clade, I'm going to do them all as one. So there's Neurosuchus daperani from the latest Permian to early Triassic, which is just a basal one, and it would have nested on land and was similar to saltwater crocodiles. And next is Katzenbucosaurus odenwaldensis, which is the largest Neurosuchian, I think, and it had big teeth and lived in the late Triassic. Then Colonosuchus lopingensis, which lived from the late Triassic to the early Jurassic, which is more specialized and was a Juraphagus and had osteoderms. And then last is Delphisuchus ferox, which is a very dolphin or ichthyosaur-like Neurosuchian. And the final Neurosuchian is Anchathasuchus, which I didn't mention then because I'm mentioning it now because it has its own fully separate entry within the event. And Anchathasuchus is from the latest Cretaceous and is a descendant of Colonosuchus. But instead of being a Juraphage like its ancestor, it is a large, up to 26 meters long, huge. It's both huge and large, and it is a filter feeder like baleen whales. Is Ichthyosuchus, which is probably the most basic speculative animal name, but this creature is Ichthyosuchus veloci by Ath, and it is a fully aquatic mesosaur from what is now India, and it has evolved to be fairly similar to ichthyosaurs. That's about all of it. Next up is the Maructor derogfensis, which is created by Trike 7117, and it is a parasaur that has evolved horns and is basically the Reek from Star Wars, and they're really aggressive and they have a social structure similar to elephants, with females forming herds and lone males. Next up is slightly different, as rather than being a genus or species, it is an entire clade, with that clade being the tribe Ursosaurini, or Bariosaurs, created by rodent. And although this tribe itself is created by rodent, not all of the creatures contained within it are created by him. For example, the Marugda is actually in this clade, and these Bariosaurs actually live in caves much of the time, and they only emerge to eat, and they're actually carnivorous, or some of them are omnivorous. And the example pictured is Ursosaurus wobicus, or Wobb's bear lizard, I think it's called. Next up is the Sigonia excelsius, which was created by Dirophs, and which is an erythrosuchid that is semi-aquatic and has, as all the erythrosuchids have, a really big head, and it has these horn-like structures on its head. Now you're probably thinking, well, erythrosuchids didn't evolve till the Triassic, and though that is technically true that we know of, it is possible that because they evolved in the very earliest Triassic, they already existed in the Permian. Next up is the Shokin paleonsis by Trike, and this is a basal Weigeltosaur that has evolved into this big, edgy, spiky griffin predator creature. And if you couldn't tell, I don't really like this creature at all. I don't really have anything else to say about it other than it sucks and I hate it. Next up is Dracos, created by Wob, also known as Freddie Floverquen, who you would recognize as the creator of the cetacean alternative. And like with the cetacean alternative, she goes very much in depth with the Dracos, which are a sapient species of Weigeltosaur that are sort of like a dragon-like sapient creature. And they have pets, the Isocows, which are huge Eurypterids. There are Vacos, which are descended from Titanophonius, which is a Permian creature that is a type of Dinocephalian, and these are like the dog equivalents for the Dracos. And then there's the Travos, which are relatives of the Dracos, in that they're also descended from Weigeltosaurs, and they act kind of like flying horses for the Dracos. And it's really in depth. Like I said, there's like an 11-page PDF about them and their civilization. So if you want to read about that, I'll find a way to link it in the description. Next up is Armaclavosaurus by Stubonk, and now this is a genus of 3 species: the mourning tank, Armaclavosaurus darwinius, the short-tailed tank, Armaclavosaurus diegensis, and the thorny tank, Armaclavosaurus wobbii. And these are 3 different scutosaurids from Russia, which have convergently evolved to be like glyptodonts. Next up is Paludontidae, or the tank dragons, which is a subfamily of scutosaurids from the early Triassic, and this subfamily includes Paluodon, which includes Paluodon macraspis, which is sometimes classified as Palaiodon macraspis macraspis. It also includes Palaiodon micraspis, which is the dwarf tank dragon, which is sometimes split into Palaiodon micraspis and Palaiodon micraspis micraspis and Palaiodon micraspis ceterinus, and also Lujanapelta antherocranius, which is sometimes placed as Palaiodon macraspis antherocranius. And now this subfamily is they're, as I said, scutosaurids, and they have large frills on their necks, similar to that of ceratopsians, whereas Lujanapelta has like almost horn-like structures on the back of its head, and Palaiodon, the two species are very similar, except one is large and the other is tiny. Next up is the Gorondes, or Gorondidae, by rodent, which are a family of gorgonopsid descendants that are bipedal and fill several niches, and they evolved in the early Triassic, but they're all also quite small. The ones pictured here are Lithoraptor darwinius, which fill the niche of raccoons. They're also found basically everywhere across Pangaea. Next up is the Hatsegovenata fragilis by the Dapper Spinosaur, which is quite similar to the Gorondes, and in fact it is, since its exact classification is not stated, some people classify it as a Goronde, and it is a descendant of the Therapsids that lives at the very latest Cretaceous, and it lives in the island chains of Europe, where things like Hatzegopteryx and Magyarosaurus and such things lived, and it has evolved to become a large predator which swims between islands to hunt for food. Next up is the sunset crass, or Brontonicus cerastes, by Chuck the Tyrannosaur, which is a large gorgonopsid with horns from the Jurassic of the southern US, and it is the last of a large family known as the Great Crasses, and it's the apex predator, feeding on pariasaurs of basically everything else found in the area where it lives. Next up is Sthenops zimbabwensis by Super-King Ghidorah, which is a gorgonopsid that fills the niche of modern big cats from the Jurassic of Zimbabwe. Next up is the Mandibulops darwino by Agron, which is another creature that is potentially a Goronde, because it is a bipedal gorgonopsid descendant with massive biting jaws, so giving it a powerful bite force, and it is also lives in family groups and have really close bonds to each other. Next up is the Scrophosaurus, also by Agron, which is a large dicynodont with massive tusks that fills a niche similar to that of pigs, but it is more herbivorous, and it also is more intelligent, being quite intelligent, with intelligence comparable to that of modern elephants, and in fact it is known from Africa in the late Triassic. Speaking of dicynodonts that fill the niche of elephants, the Orophant, Elephantomimus gambetodon, by rodent is very similar to Scrophosaurus, but much larger, It too is from the Triassic, but from the early Triassic rather than the late, and it is much bigger. It also has downward-facing tusks instead of sideward-facing ones, similar to Dinotherium, and it uses these to dig for roots and plants, similar to mammoths with snow. Next up is another family, which is Dendrophagonidae by Duroffs, and these are descendants of Tepanocephalians, which have evolved really long necks and are similar to sauropods. And the species in this genus are Dendrotitan Trichaurus, which is it's got little antler things and a horn on its nose, and it's the biggest in this family, and they live in herds. Next is Ogoton monacensis, which is a smaller member of this family, and it has one very big horn. And last is Dendrotitan gambitus, which is a pygmy species of Dendrotitan, as it lived on islands, but it still lives in little herds. Next up is the Panzertiae Gabaraquenflorensis by Paleo, which is an ankyosaurid that has become the apex predator in Germany at about 235 million years ago, and it has evolved large saber teeth and fills the niche of saber-toothed cats and gorgonopsids. Next up is the Comodimetrodon arizonensis by Super-King Ghidorah, and this creature is a descendant of Dimetrodon from the Morrison Formation, living through the entire Jurassic, but it has evolved teeth similar to a Komodo dragon, and it hunts in a similar way to how we thought Komodo dragons hunted before we discovered they had venomous teeth. Next up is Spinophis tylocanthus, or the ridge snake, by me, which is a legless sphenacodont descendant that lives in Glossopteris forests in Australia in the early Jurassic, and it has a relationship with these giant fly ancestors which live inside its mouth, and the maggots eat flesh off of the teeth of the Spinophis. Next up is the Planosaurus wabiti, which is basically just a chonky edaphosaur that has evolved to become a stegosaur equivalent. There's not much else about it. It's by Agron. I forgot to mention that earlier. Next up is the Symplecomenisaurus by Super-King Ghidorah, and this is a genus of omnivorous edaphosaurid from the Morrison Formation, which has a sail which splits in half and then goes it's hard to explain, but it has a sail which at the middle of the sail there's just like a gap in it. Yeah, it's not much else on this. Up next is another family of creatures by Duroffs, and this family is a family of edaphosaurids, and they are the Trecontanus zeros, which is a bipedal edaphosaur which lives in large groups. Then there's its larger relative, the Trecontanus cranidas, which also has armored spikings on its head. And the final one is Guidarosaurus plotsii, which is the largest species, so large that it is mostly quadrupedal, although it can run on 2 legs, and it also has an incredibly powerful kick. Last, but certainly not least, is the dread sloth, or Gorgotherium nemus, by Fart Blossom / Mr. Beelzebufo. Now this creature is basically just a giant ground sloth, except instead of descended from sloths, it is descended from Suminia, which is a ape-like synapsid from, I think it's a synapsid, but it might be a pyrreptile, from the Permian. And that was Therapsidus. I hope you enjoyed this video because it took me way too long to make. It took me like a month to edit and record because I'm lazy. But now that I've got this out of the way, I can do more content, and I'm going to do a few new things after this is out. I'll also be doing an update video on the cetacean alternatives, but keep tuned for all new things, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching, and have an excellent day.